Have you ever wondered why everything affects you more than others? Have you ever wondered why some people seem to hold it all back? While you feel everything intensely to the point of crying easily even in situations that others consider normal? And worse, have you ever caught yourself thinking that this is a defect of yours? The truth is that this perception can be completely distorted, and understanding this can change the way you see yourself from now on. There is a psychological explanation behind his high emotional sensitivity, his intense empathy, and even this emotional overthinking that never seems to turn off. No, you are not weak. Quite the opposite, your brain may be operating with a level of depth that most people don't even realize. The problem is that no one taught you how to deal with it, and then everything becomes emotional overload. Throughout this content, you will understand how your brain filter, your mirror neurons, and even possible experiences of mild accumulated emotional trauma directly influence the way you feel and react. More than that, you will discover how to transform this intensity into strength, learning emotional regulation, creating emotional boundaries, and changing the way you interpret your own crying. If you cry easily, chances are you've heard that it's weakness, drama, or even lack of control. But let me tell you something right off the bat: not only is this wrong, but it could be making you completely misinterpret yourself. High emotional sensitivity is not a defect, it is a different and more intense way of processing the world. And, honestly, the problem is almost never crying. It is the judgment on him. We grew up hearing that holding everything is a sign of strength, as if emotional expression was something that needs to be hidden. But in practice, those who repress too much end up paying the bill later, whether in the form of emotional overload, anxiety, or even that famous emotional overthinking that never turns off. In other words, the strong who do not cry often only learn to swallow, not to cope. And hey race, the game changer: crying easily can be a sign that your emotional system is working, not failing. Your brain may have a more sensitive brain filter, picking up on nuances that other people simply ignore. Instead of seeing it as weakness, maybe it's time to see it as a more refined kind of perception. And powerful, when well understood. You know that moment when you're living a completely normal day, and suddenly, something small happens, and that's it. Are the eyes already watering? It could be a simple comment, a scene in a movie, or even a different tone of voice. Those with high emotional sensitivity tend to go through this often, and the feeling is always the same: why am I crying about this? And the most curious thing is that, many times, it does not seem to have enough reason, but the truth is that it is not out of nowhere. There's a silent build-up there, an emotional overthinking going on behind the scenes, processing 1,000 things at once that your brain, with this more sensitive brain filter, captures details that go unnoticed by most and all of. This adds up, even if you don't consciously realize it. It's as if you have several tabs open in your mind all the time: feelings, memories, worries. That all active, then all it takes is a small trigger to overflow. The crying, in this case, is not an exaggeration, it is a legitimate emotional expression of an emotional overload that was already brewing, and understanding this completely changes the way you see yourself. But there is a detail that usually comes right after all this. After the moment of crying, something comes that often weighs even more: shame. It's that automatic thought arising almost as a reflex: this again, what's wrong with me? Self-criticism comes into play with force, and you begin to judge yourself as if you have made a mistake, when in fact you have only had a genuine emotional expression. This pattern of constantly questioning yourself feeds a complicated cycle. Emotional overthinking takes this episode and begins to analyze every detail, as if trying to find an internal flaw. But with a more sensitive brain filter, you not only feel more, but also thinks more about what he felt. Result? The emotion passes, but the judgment remains and accumulates. Over time, this can become almost a habit: feeling, crying, and then blaming yourself. This sequence wears you out, generates even more emotional overload, and reinforces the idea that there is something wrong with you. But does this critical look really come from you? Or was it learned throughout life? Because when we start to investigate this, we realize that there is much more external influence than it seems. If you stop to observe, this feeling of "there's something wrong with me" didn't come out of nowhere. It was built little by little, in loose phrases that you have heard throughout your life: swallow your tears, this is drama, there are people with bigger problems. These ideas shape a distorted cultural belief, where emotional expression comes to be seen as weakness and not as something human. The problem is that this view completely ignores how high emotional sensitivity works. More sensitive people don't choose to feel more. They simply have a more active, more responsive emotional system. But instead of learning how to regulate emotions, they end up trying to fit into a pattern that wasn't made for them, which only increases emotional overload and internal conflict. And here comes a delicate point: the more you try to repress what you feel to seem strong, the more your body finds other ways to release it later. Crying, in this case, becomes almost an inevitable emotional leak. In other words, it's not that you feel too much. It's just that you've been taught wrong about what to do with it. And when we start to look at this process in a more technical way, we can understand exactly what is happening behind it. Now let's take this out of the field of opinion and bring it to psychological reality. Crying is literally a form of emotional processing happening in real time. It's not out of control, it's your system trying to regulate what's too intense. When you have high emotional sensitivity, this process happens more frequently and intensely, because there is more information being felt and integrated at the same time. Think of it like this: while many people hold back and sue later or don't process at all, you are already dealing with it there, live. This involves mechanisms such as mirror neurons, which make you absorb emotions from the environment, and a less rigid brain filter, which lets more stimuli in. Result? Your body reacts before any rationalization, and crying appears as part of this emotional regulation. In fact, there is a biological side to this that few people talk about. Crying helps reduce emotional overload, releasing tension and even certain hormones linked to stress. In other words, it's not just psychological, it's physiological as well. Ignoring or blocking this may seem like control in the short term, but in the long term it only fuels more emotional overthinking and internal accumulation. Which leads to an important question: why do some people feel all this so intensely? Imagine that your brain works like a filter. But in your case, this brain filter is much more open than most people's. While others miss only the essentials, you capture subtle details, expressions, changes in tone, energies of the environment. This is typical of those with high emotional sensitivity and explains why everything seems more intense, even in simple situations. The point is that this excess of emotional information doesn't come with an instruction manual. You feel more, you perceive more, but you don't always know how to emotionally regulate it all in real time. And then the obvious happens: this constant entry of stimuli generates an emotional overload, as if your mind was always full, with no room to breathe. Over time, this fuels emotional overthinking, because your brain tries to keep up with everything that has come in. It's like you're watching multiple movies at once, trying to make sense of every scene. The crying, in this context, is not an exaggeration, it is a natural response from a system that has received more than it has been able to organize. And when we dig deeper into this, we realize that it's not just about you. It's also about the environment and the people around you. You know when you enter a place and feel the atmosphere, even without anyone saying anything? Or do you realize that someone is not well just because of the way they breathe or because of the different silence? This is a clear sign of high emotional sensitivity and emotional reading of the environment far above average. You don't need explanations. You get it. The problem is that this ability comes with no off button. Your brain filter not only lets in more stimuli, but also interprets everything in depth. Small changes become big signs, and this further fuels emotional overthinking. You start trying to understand what the other feels, what they meant, what can happen. And when you see it, you are already emotionally involved in something that was not even yours. This hyperreading, despite being a powerful form of connection, can also generate emotional overload if there are no clear emotional boundaries. Because, at the end of the day, feeling the environment all the time is tiring and a lot. And when we go even deeper, we realize that this doesn't happen just by perception. There is an internal mechanism that makes you literally feel what the other feels. There is a mechanism in your brain that helps explain why you feel everything so intensely. Mirror neurons. They are responsible for making you internally simulate what the other is experiencing. That is, when someone is sad, anxious, or even embarrassed, you don't just understand, you feel together. That's where this intense empathy comes in, which often seems too heavy. In those who have high emotional sensitivity, this system is usually more active. Your brain filter doesn't block out these external emotions easily, so they come in as if they were your own. This can generate enormous internal confusion, because you begin to absorb feelings that do not always belong to you. Result? More emotional overload and that classic emotional overthinking, trying to organize everything. And here comes an essential point: without emotional limits, this empathy turns into exhaustion. You start to carry the weight of others without realizing it, as if it were your responsibility to relieve it. Crying, in this context, is often the body saying it's enough. But where does all this intensity come from? Did it start now? Or does it have older roots than it seems? Many people think they were born that way, but the truth is that their high emotional sensitivity may have been shaped throughout life. Especially if you grew up in unpredictable environments where you had to read the air all the time to protect yourself. In these situations, the brain adapts, making the brain filter more attentive, more sensitive. Almost in a state of constant surveillance. This type of adaptation, often linked to a mild accumulated emotional trauma, causes you to develop a very keen emotional perception. You learn to identify minimal signs of change, because at some point, it was necessary. But the problem is that this pattern remains active even when the danger no longer exists, and then comes the emotional overload. And as all this was not fully processed back then, emotional overthinking comes into play, trying to make sense of what was pending. Old emotions mix with current ones, and crying ends up being a way to release this invisible accumulation. It's not just about what happened now. It's about everything that came before as well. And often, before you can even understand it, your body is already reacting. Perhaps one of the most frustrating parts of crying easily is feeling like it happens before you can even hold on. And that's not an impression, it's real. Your body reacts first. When something activates an intense emotion, the emotional system kicks in before the rational part can interpret it. In those who have high emotional sensitivity, this response time is even faster. It's as if your emotional brain presses the button before your logical side has a chance to give its opinion. The brain filter lets stimuli pass through more easily, and the body already translates this into a physical reaction: lump in the throat, teary eyes, altered breathing. This is all part of automatic emotional regulation, even if self-criticism later comes saying that you should have acted differently. And then that internal conflict is born: I know I didn't need to cry, so why did I cry? But this question is based on a logic that ignores the actual functioning of your system. It's not a lack of control, it's emotional speed. And when you try to suppress that by force, the effect is often the opposite: more emotional overload, more emotional overthinking. And, eventually, more explosion. There are days when you hold it, swallow it, pretend that everything is fine. And even succeeds, but this does not disappear, it is just being stored. Small frustrations, worries, everyday tensions, all of this is silently accumulating. In those who have high emotional sensitivity, this accumulation happens faster, because the volume of stimuli processed is greater. The problem is that, without frequent emotional expression, This internal content begins to weigh down. Emotional overload grows little by little, and emotional overthinking tries to cope, revisiting situations, creating scenarios, pulling memories. When you realize it, you're already tired for no apparent reason. Until something small happens and becomes the fuse, and that's where the explosion comes, the intense crying, sometimes disproportionate to the current moment, but really, it's not about now. It's about everything that was kept. It is the body trying to make a delayed emotional regulation, without clear emotional boundaries and without spaces for healthy discharge. This tends to repeat itself, and that's exactly why the solution is not to stop feeling, but in learning to deal with it in a different way. Now comes the part that changes everything. You don't have to stop feeling. He needs to learn to deal with what he feels. Your high emotional sensitivity isn't the problem, the lack of strategy for dealing with it is. The first step is simple but powerful. Allow emotional expression without guilt. Instead of judging yourself when crying comes, try naming what you're feeling. Something like, okay, this affected me more than I expected, already starts to create awareness. Then comes an essential point, developing emotional limits. And hey, raise something practical. Start by observing situations that drain you. People, environments, conversations. All of this impacts your brain filtered. You don't have to step away from everything, but you can adjust how much you expose yourself. Small decisions, such as pausing a conversation or leaving a loaded environment, already help to avoid emotional overload. And finally, invest in active emotional regulation. This means creating intentional moments to unload what you feel before accumulating. It could be writing for 10 minutes at the end of the day, taking a distraction-free walk, or even talking to someone you trust. If you want to go deeper, books like Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman bring practical insights on how to better deal with emotions, because, in the end, the goal is not to harden. That is to become emotionally aware. Now tell me honestly, after all this, does it still make sense to see yourself as someone weak just because you feel more, or had you just never understood how your high emotional sensitivity really works? Perhaps the problem was never that you cried easily, but rather the way you interpreted it, always with self-criticism, never with understanding. What if, from today, you started treating your emotions as signs? Instead of mistakes. What if, instead of repressing, you learned to use emotional expression as an emotion regulation tool, creating emotional boundaries, respecting your brain filter, and understanding your intense empathy isn't weakness, it's emotional maturity in the making. So hey, race the reflection. What would change in your life if you stopped fighting against what you feel? And start working with it. How far could you go if this intensity stopped being a burden and became a force? If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because understanding the mind is the first step to transforming your own life.